Rashid Al-Mansouri was the untouchable king of Dubai's nightlife, and Maribel Santos was the bright young Filipina bartender chasing a better life. Together they shared a secret affair that should have remained hidden, until Maribel tried to break free, and Rashid's obsession turned the glamorous walls of his nightclub into the scene of a shocking murder. In the glittering heart of Dubai, where the desert meets steel towers and neon lights, there was a place that symbolized luxury and desire. The Velvet Mirage stood like a jewel in the nightlife scene, a club known for its wealth, its high-profile visitors, and its intoxicating energy that could make people forget the outside world. It was not just a place to drink and dance, it was a world where appearances reigned supreme, where secrets hid behind every smile, and where power was disguised as charm. At the center of this empire stood Rashid Al-Mansouri, a man as magnetic as he was feared. He was the owner, the gatekeeper of glamour, and the silent judge of who was allowed to belong. With his tailored suits, sharp gaze, and perfectly rehearsed words, he created an image of confidence and success that dazzled all who entered. Yet behind the allure, Rashid was a man who thrived on control, a man who believed that everything he desired should belong to him. Among the people who worked under his watchful eyes was Maribel Santos, a young woman from the Philippines who had come to Dubai with dreams larger than her small hometown. At 26, she was known for her radiant smile and the energy she carried behind the bar. Night after night, she mixed cocktails with flawless precision, her hands moving with grace, her presence lighting up the room in a way no chandelier ever could. Customers adored her not only for her skill, but for the warmth she brought into the cold, polished world of the nightclub. Many saw her as the rising star among the staff, someone destined to build a life far from the struggles she had left behind. But behind Maribel's charm was a quiet determination. Every tip she earned, every shift she completed, was a step closer to helping her family back home. Her dreams were not about glittering stages or nights of indulgence, but about stability, dignity, and the promise of something better. Yet it was within the same place that gave her opportunity that her greatest danger waited. Rashid had noticed her from the beginning. What started as passing compliments and subtle gestures soon turned into something darker, something that felt less like admiration and more like ownership. His eyes followed her, his presence always lingering, and it was clear that he saw her not as an employee, but as an extension of his power. Their relationship began in the shadows, in the moments when the music drowned out the world and the lights flickered in secrecy. For Maribel, it was complicated. Rashid's attention carried both a thrill and a threat. She knew refusing him outright was dangerous in a city where he held so much influence, yet being with him filled her with unease. At first, she convinced herself it was temporary, that she could manage it quietly while focusing on her goals. But what she did not see was how deeply Rashid's feelings had grown, not into love, but into obsession. To him, Maribel was no longer a person, but a prize, a secret possession he could never allow to slip away. In a city built on wealth and illusion, appearances were everything. The outside world saw a successful nightclub, a powerful owner, and a bartender admired by all. What they did not see were the silent chains forming around Maribel, the way Rashid's presence pressed into every corner of her life. She carried the weight of it in silence, balancing her dreams against the growing shadow of control. The Velvet Mirage, to outsiders, was a place of laughter and escape, but for her, it was becoming a golden cage. And within that cage, her life was moving toward a collision she could neither predict nor prevent. Maribel had always known that Dubai was a city of sharp contrasts, a place where dazzling lights could hide the darkest corners. For months, she had managed to live between two worlds, the world of her own quiet ambition and the world Rashid had forced her into. At first, she convinced herself that she could endure it, that playing along with his attention was safer than challenging him. But slowly, she began to feel the weight of his grip tightening. What had once felt like flattery began to reveal itself as something suffocating. Rashid was no longer satisfied with stolen moments. He began to demand more of her time, more of her attention, more of her life. His words, always calm and carefully chosen in public, turned cold and sharp when they were alone. Maribel realized she was not a partner in his eyes. She was property. She started noticing how his presence seemed to follow her everywhere. If she left work, there would be a driver waiting who claimed Rashid had sent him. If she laughed too freely with a coworker, Rashid's stare would harden from across the room. He would remind her subtly, sometimes with a quiet comment, sometimes with an unspoken gesture, that he saw everything. Maribel felt her independence shrinking, each day pulling her further away from the dreams that had brought her to the city. She was not building her future anymore. She was trapped in someone else's design. It was during a long shift one night that Maribel realized she could not continue like this. The music was loud, the crowd endless, but her thoughts were louder than all of it. She imagined her family waiting for her messages, her mother telling neighbors proudly about her work abroad, her younger siblings dreaming because she was paving the way. That vision was too important to risk. She could not allow herself to be swallowed whole by Rashid's obsession. Ending the affair became not just a desire but a necessity for her survival. Maribel chose her moment carefully. She thought that perhaps if she approached it gently, Rashid might understand. She hoped he would see that her decision was not betrayal but self-preservation. When she finally gathered the courage to tell him it was over, her hands trembled, though her words were steady. She spoke of needing to focus on herself, of the future she wanted to build, of gratitude for the help he had given her, but a clear need to step away. On the surface, Rashid appeared calm. His lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes unreadable, and he simply nodded. To anyone else, it would have looked as though he had accepted her choice. But deep within Rashid's mind, her rejection ignited a storm. To him, this was not an ending, it was humiliation. Rashid had built his life on control, on ensuring that nothing and no one ever slipped from his grasp. Maribel's decision was not only a refusal of his power, it was a strike at his pride. He would not allow her to walk away unscathed. The smile he gave her was nothing more than a mask, a thin layer hiding the fury that brewed beneath. From that moment, Rashid's behavior shifted. He no longer approached her directly, no longer pressed her with questions or demands. Instead, he began to watch. The nightclub's cameras, installed to protect the business, became his tools of surveillance. He studied her every interaction, her every gesture, compiling silent evidence of what he called betrayal. He hired people to follow her outside the club, to record where she went, who she saw, and how she lived when she thought no one was watching. His obsession deepened into something dangerous, something that no longer resembled affection at all. Maribel felt the change, though she could not yet see the full extent of it. The air grew heavier around her, the walls of the club felt closer, and her steps felt watched. The Velvet Mirage no longer felt like the place where she was building her future. It had become a stage where Rashid's silent rage was growing in the shadows. She had chosen freedom, but freedom in Rashid's world was something he was never willing to grant. The decision she believed would save her life had unknowingly set in motion the chain of events that would lead to her most dangerous night. The night that would decide everything began like so many others at the Velvet Mirage, filled with music, laughter, and the rhythmic pulse of lights that painted the walls in shades of gold and red. Tourists poured in from luxury hotels, locals arrived in sleek cars, and the atmosphere carried the illusion that nothing bad could happen in a place built so carefully on glamour. Behind the bar, Maribel worked tirelessly, her hands moving from glass to glass, her smile never faltering even though her body was tired. For her, nights like these were routine, but she carried a quiet unease that she could not shake. Somewhere deep down, she sensed that Rashid's silence since their last conversation was not peace, but the calm before something darker. From his private balcony above the main floor, Rashid sat with a drink that remained untouched. The music vibrated through the air, but he heard none of it. His eyes followed only one person, tracing every movement Maribel made. To him, this night was different. He had spent days thinking, waiting, and planning. He told himself that if she would not belong to him willingly, then he would decide her fate himself. The nightclub that once symbolized his empire of control had now become the stage for his final act. As the hours passed, the crowd slowly thinned. The laughter turned into murmurs, the dance floor emptied, and the once loud music softened before fading altogether. Staff began their routine of cleaning and closing, but Maribel stayed longer than most. She stacked glasses, wiped down counters, and prepared the bar for the next evening. She thought of home, of the life she wanted to build far away from the shadows of this place. Rashid watched her every move, his patience sharpening into determination. When the last of the customers left and the heavy doors closed, silence fell inside the Velvet Mirage. The silence was thick, unsettling, broken only by the sound of Maribel moving behind the bar. Rashid rose from his seat, his footsteps measured as he descended from the balcony. The echo of his shoes against the polished floor carried through the empty club like a warning. Maribel heard the sound, but before she could react, Rashid stood before her. His presence filled the room in an instant. He confronted her with a mixture of calm words and rising anger, his voice trembling not with sadness but with fury. To Rashid, she had betrayed him, humiliated him, stripped away the control he prized above all. Maribel tried to explain, to reason, but every word she spoke only fueled the storm inside him. He was not listening to her voice. He was listening to the echo of his own pride breaking apart. The confrontation escalated with frightening speed. What began as words twisted into rage. In that dark, silent bar, surrounded by the remnants of another glamorous night, Rashid crossed the line from obsession into violence. His anger exploded, and Maribel had no escape. The very walls that had once trapped her in silence now bore witness to her final moments. In a space that sparkled with lights and music hours earlier, her life was taken with chilling brutality. When it was over, Rashid stood alone in the heavy silence, his chest rising and falling with the weight of what he had done. The room that had once been his kingdom now felt like a tomb. In a haze of cold calculation, he dragged Maribel's lifeless body into the nightclub's locked storage room, hidden behind heavy doors no guest would ever notice. There, he left her, thinking he had created enough time to cover what had happened. The Velvet Mirage, still glowing faintly from the night's energy, carried an unspoken truth that no one yet knew. Outside, the city carried on, lights flashing, cars moving, and people celebrating life. Inside, the crime was sealed away in silence, waiting to be uncovered. For Rashid, the illusion of control remained intact for the moment, but the reality was beginning to shift. The night had claimed Maribel's life, but it had also set into motion the unraveling of Rashid's own. Rashid believed he was untouchable. In the hours after the crime, he moved with a calculated calmness that suggested he had rehearsed it in his mind long before the act itself. He called in two of his most loyal employees, men who had served him for years and depended on his money for their survival in the city. With cold precision, he told them the club needed to be cleaned thoroughly before the next evening. They obeyed, scrubbing every surface, polishing every floor, and erasing even the faintest trace of what had happened. Rashid supervised silently, his eyes sharp, his mind racing with thoughts of control. He believed that money and power could silence loyalty, that fear would keep mouths closed. To him, this was not the end of his empire, only a minor storm he could cover with his wealth and influence. But the truth has a way of pushing itself to the surface. The first sign of trouble came the very next day when Maribel failed to return home. Her friends grew concerned when she did not answer calls or messages. This was unlike her. Maribel was dependable, a woman who carried responsibility not just for herself but for her family. When hours turned into a full day, her absence could no longer be dismissed as exhaustion or personal choice. Her close friends, also Filipino workers, went to the authorities and filed a missing person report. For them, it was not just worry, it was fear, because they knew how dangerous Dubai could be for those without power when they crossed the wrong people. The investigation began quietly, but with determination. Dubai was a city known for its surveillance and strict order. Investigators traced her last known location to the Velvet Mirage, the place where she had been seen working just before she disappeared. Rashid welcomed them into his club with the same charm he used on wealthy patrons, offering cooperation and carefully chosen words. He smiled, explained that she had finished her shift, and suggested she might have gone out afterward. On the surface, his performance was flawless, but investigators in Dubai were not easily convinced by charm alone. The nightclub's security cameras became the first breakthrough. Rashid had ordered some footage erased, believing that would protect him. What he did not realize was that the system automatically backed up certain files to an off-site server as part of its design. Investigators uncovered hours of footage that told a different story. The cameras showed Rashid entering the bar long after it had closed, approaching Maribel when no one else was present. The recordings showed him remaining in the building long into the early morning, with no sign of Maribel leaving afterward. This evidence shifted the investigation sharply. The once respected nightclub owner was no longer a cooperative businessman, but the prime suspect in a possible crime. When investigators returned to the Velvet Mirage, they searched beyond the public spaces, looking in areas most guests would never see. It was there, behind the locked door of the storage room, that the truth was finally revealed. Maribel's body lay hidden, silent proof of what had happened in the hours after the club had closed. The discovery spread quickly through the city. News of her death shook not only the Filipino community, but the larger population that had once admired Rashid's empire. The glamorous reputation of the Velvet Mirage crumbled in an instant, its polished floors now remembered as the scene of something far darker. For staff who had once feared Rashid, silence was no longer an option. Slowly, testimonies began to surface. Employees admitted to the controlling way he treated Maribel, to the obsessive watchfulness, and to the attempts at cleaning the club after the night she vanished. Each new piece of evidence tightened the case against him. What Rashid had believed could be covered up with money and power was instead exposed by surveillance, routine checks, and the voices of those who could no longer protect his secrets. His calm facade began to crack as investigators pieced together the chain of events. The Velvet Mirage, once his sanctuary, was now the centerpiece of a criminal investigation. And the truth that Rashid had tried so desperately to bury had risen from the silence of a locked room to confront him with undeniable force. The arrest of Rashid al-Mansouri sent shockwaves through the city. The man once celebrated as the king of Dubai's nightlife was now escorted in handcuffs from his glass-walled penthouse that overlooked the skyline he had long ruled over. His fall was swift, his power slipping from his grasp in a matter of days. The empire he had built on charm, money, and fear began to collapse the moment investigators led him away. Business partners distanced themselves instantly, denying any close ties. The Velvet Mirage closed its doors, its neon sign turned off, leaving only the darkened outline of a place that had once symbolized luxury, but now carried the weight of tragedy. The trial became a spectacle. People packed the courtroom, eager to see how justice would unfold in a city known for its order and strict law. Rashid sat at the center, his sharp suits replaced by plain prison clothes, his confident stare replaced with one that revealed cracks of unease. For a man who once dictated who belonged in his world, he now belonged to a system far larger than him. Evidence piled high against him, from the surveillance footage showing him with Maribel on her final night, to the testimony of employees who revealed the control and fear he cast over her. Each detail dismantled the image of respectability he had carefully maintained for years. Witnesses spoke of his obsession, of the way he hovered over Maribel, how his behavior turned from fascination to something that felt more like imprisonment. Former staff who had once been silent began to testify about the night of the crime, explaining how they were ordered to clean and keep quiet. Rashid's attempts to buy loyalty with money and intimidation were laid bare in court, stripping away the last layers of his illusion. The defense tried to argue that the death was an accident, that emotions had flared in the heat of a private argument. But the brutality of the evidence and the meticulous cover-up painted a different picture, one of a man unwilling to lose control and determined to erase his mistakes. As the trial stretched on, the story of Maribel Santos spread far beyond Dubai. Her face appeared in newspapers, her name spoken in churches back home in the Philippines, her story told among migrant workers who saw themselves in her struggle. She was no longer just a bartender. She became a symbol of resilience, of the silent battles so many fought while working abroad. Her family in the Philippines, devastated by grief, demanded not only justice but remembrance. They spoke of her dreams, of the sacrifices she made, and of the life she had tried to build. Their voices carried weight in the courtroom, reminding everyone that Maribel was not just a victim in a headline, but a daughter, a sister, a woman with ambitions stolen too soon. The verdict arrived with a heavy silence in the courtroom. Rashid was found guilty of murder, obstruction, and abuse of power. The sentence was harsh, reflecting not only the crime itself, but the arrogance with which he believed he could conceal it. For the first time, the man who had controlled so many lives sat powerless, facing years behind bars, his name forever tied not to wealth and success, but to violence and disgrace. The king of nightlife had fallen, and the fall was absolute. The city moved forward, but the scar remained. The Velvet Mirage never reopened. Its walls stood empty, a ghostly reminder of the night glamour gave way to horror. People who once danced under its lights now avoided even passing by, as though the memory of Maribel's final moments lingered in the very air. Yet within the sadness, there was also a sense of reckoning. Rashid's punishment became a warning that power could not always bury truth, that wealth and status were not shields against justice. Maribel's story lived on in more than headlines. For her family, her memory was carried in every prayer, every gathering, every quiet moment when they spoke her name. For strangers, she became a reminder of the hidden struggles faced by those who leave home to seek better lives. Though her life ended in tragedy, her legacy was one of courage, a woman who tried to break free from control and whose story exposed the darkness that can hide beneath luxury. Rashid lost everything, but Maribel gained something far greater. Her story became a voice that could not be silenced, echoing beyond the walls of the nightclub where she took her last breath.